Catholics are very proud of, like, look at the healthcare systems we've built in this country. It's great, right? That's going to die because you can't do it when most people running it don't believe in the faith anymore.
Well, again, it's very important to talk about this universalism and the idea that, the vast majority of people will be saved, because, again, that's contrary to what the church teaches.
Right.
And it's simply not reality. That's what the church teaches, is what is true. And it reminds me of something that a lot of people don't talk about much anymore, but we need to bring it back. The four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. And some of the greatest saints, they're even depicted in art holding a skull or with a skull on their desk.
Yeah.
And people say, oh, why do they have a skull? It's to remind them this life is passing quickly, and we need to be aware of those four last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Instead of worried about what will the neighbors say, or will I get some flack from upstairs if I say something that is the truth but is not politically correct. All of that is an attitude that forgets what our destiny is and assumes that what Jesus did doesn't really matter. I mean, that's what is at the heart of universalism. If that were really the message, then he didn't need to die on a cross. He just needed to come and wave at everybody and say, come on, guys, let's go to heaven.
Here's something you say. It says it cannot survive when 70% or more of its members reject basic doctrines like the real presence or its teaching on marriage, or when large numbers of its theologians teach the same, meaning the church cannot survive. You go on to say, observing declining numbers of baptisms, confirmations, weddings, and mass attendance over the years, some Catholics like to invoke Joseph Ratzinger's 1969 interview when he predicted the church would become smaller and poorer, but also purer as the consequence of this decline. He predicted that once the church lost its standing, it would become the church of the meek. I love the former pontiff, but I think this is way off the mark, close quote. Wow, so much could be said here. I'm thinking about this, but here's one thought. We are supposed to be set apart. We are supposed to go out into the world, meet people where they're at, and get them where they got to go, which is to heaven. Which means we cannot allow people to dwell in their sin. We cannot allow people to pretend as though their sins are somehow okay or not sins. And yet we see a contrast in the body of Christ today where there are many who would say, oh, it's okay. We're going to bless same-sex unions. We're going to okay marriage and divorce on demand. We're going to okay all of these moral evils, IVF, abortifacients, abortion itself, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet the more traditional Catholics are like, no, these things are not okay. We should never tolerate them. And yet they're being painted as the bad guys. What say you?
When you say 70% of the people who answer these things, that's got to include priests and theologians, people with authority. And that's the huge problem. That's the downside of being the establishment, is that when you are the church of everybody, that's another way I put it in the essay, it allows people who aren't fully committed to gain authority, and that's a problem. It's one thing to have people who are struggling in the faith, right? You help the weaker along, right, if they have a problem with teaching on this or teaching on that. And you can do that if your leadership actually believes what it's supposed to believe. But today, of course, that's the main problem, is it doesn't seem like the leadership of the Catholic Church really does. And that's another reason that I'd say the church needs to become more sect-like, because since everybody's committed, you don't have that problem in a small sect. And you need to have that. You simply cannot have, I mentioned theologians. I don't know how, they're a joke to faithful Catholics, most theologians, for a reason. They simply don't teach the faith anymore. It's just going to die away. The Catholics are very proud of, for example, Catholic hospitals. Look at the healthcare systems we've built in this country. It's great, right? That's going to die because it can't be based on, you can't do it when most people running it don't believe in the faith anymore. No amount of compromise or adaptation to the wider society has helped this. Part of this is just this sensibility that we have to be part of the mainstream of society. We don't want to become some small group people are suspicious of. And my point is, one way or the other, you're going to be smaller. That's why to survive, but also, again, to flourish, you're going to need to regain that militancy that the early church had, that the church has elsewhere. in the world right now.
You say it is likely not a coincidence that the most virulent opposition to traditionalism and the Latin Mass comes from Europe, while traditionalism seems to flourish in places like England and the United States, where Catholics have long been a minority in a dominant Protestant culture. Why is Europe different here?
Oh, because they've been the establishment. I mean, they're clearly, and especially Italy, that's what I was thinking of, especially they're used to being part of the society. They're used to church being the church of everybody in those types of places. And where you have the experience of being, again, a smaller sect. And somebody actually got one good response from traditionalists in a Facebook group I'm in. He mentioned France, right? Because the French are still kind of a beating heart of traditional Catholicism. And I pointed out to him, yes, they didn't live in a Protestant society, but since about 1905, when they passed their law of separation of church and state there, they've been in a similar situation. For a long time, they've been surrounded by a hostile society, a hostile government, and they've learned to flourish despite that. And that's where those three countries, the Anglophone countries, Britain, America, and then France, are where traditional Catholicism flourishes. And I think a church needs to learn from that experience, particularly at the leaders at the highest level, because I think they're still convinced that, again, if we just compromise enough, then we won't have to do that. And my point is, you're going to have to do it one way or the other. But yes, that is something that they, especially, I mentioned the Italians because if you don't know, they tend to be the moving force behind Traditionis Custodes, and I think they see this as some sort of, I think they're terrified that a group like the traditionalists means they'll have to become, a sect themselves. There are clearly a lot of churchmen who like their authority. They like being seen as equals by their secular counterparts in the secular world. But if you enforce if you actually believe everything the church believes and insist upon it, you will not be that anymore. They will not treat you as equals. They'll despise you. Catholics are going to have to learn, if they're going to keep their faith, to be hated. That's just kind of coming. There's no way to avoid that now. And like you said, though, if you're more forthright about it, I'm glad you brought up Justin Martyr. If you're more like that, you will make converts. You will head off the worst aspects of that. But nobody respects anybody who compromises their stated beliefs. So that's not the way to go.